Europe is the second smallest continent in the world. Today it has 52 sovereign nations. It is a place where you can drive for 2 hours in Northern Europe and encounter four languages, all difficult to understand in any way. What's important about Europe is that it conquered the world. And it conquered and brought a singular culture of science and philosophy to the world, and yet never stopped being at war with itself. Never stopped this constant warfare. But it seemed like it was ending. And in 1910, a man called Norman Angell, who was an extremely bright man and won the Nobel Prize, wrote a book called The Great Illusion, where he demonstrated that there could be no serious wars in Europe because the level of interdependence, the exposure in the financial markets if there was a war, the consequences for trade made such a war impossible. We look back chuckling, but throughout my writing of this book, I kept remembering Norman Angell, the absolute, and if you will, smug certainty that Europe had put its history behind it. Its absolute smug conviction that it couldn't happen anymore. And this was from a person of enormous sophistication and enormous learning. He was not a frivolous man. And yet he didn't see what was coming right in front of them. And that's a story that has to be told in itself. How Europe convinces itself of its exceptionalism. And I would argue has again convinced itself of European exceptionalism, that it's solved the problem of a war. It solved the problem of being oppressive. It solved the problem of poverty. And yet we remember that this is a theme that repeats itself in European history, never more catastrophically than just on the eve of 1913, when so much was happening. In 31 years, Europe went from being the center of gravity of an imperial system, the likes of which the world had never seen, to being occupied territory. One half occupied by the Soviet Union, one half occupied by the United States. Each treated their territory differently, but in the end, European sovereignty was lost. The decision of war and peace, the fundamental decision of sovereignty, was not made any longer in Paris, Berlin, or London. It was made in Washington and Moscow. And I might add, rarely noticed, given the nuclear weapons that they had, the Americans and the Russians behaved with enormous prudence. I always wonder what would have happened if the wise statesmen of Europe of 1914 or 1939 owned nuclear weapons. I think we were fortunate. From 1945 until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1992, peace was not a gift the Europeans gave themselves. It was one given to them by the Americans and the Russians. It was only in 1992, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and therefore the Americans lost interest, that Europe was truly sovereign. And it was in 1992, by coincidence, that the Maastricht Treaty, creating the modern European Union, the Eurozone, everything else, went into existence. And it did create a continent of enormous hope and promise. And it spread to countries like Greece, opened the door that Greece would participate in the European experiment, promised that Germany and France would never again be enemies. It succeeded magnificently. But the years of 1992 and after were among the most prosperous years in the world. It was a period of extraordinary prosperity. And certainly the European Union knew how to handle prosperity. Because the founding principle of Europe that's contained in its documents is peace and prosperity. Not like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit, but prosperity and peace. And it left open the question, What if there was no prosperity? What if there was no peace? What would happen then?